You are 65 years old tomorrow morning, or you will be someday, and in that first 15 minutes after the alarm goes off, something is happening inside your body that almost nobody has ever explained to you properly. Richard Feynman, one of the sharpest scientific minds of the 20th century, spent his life insisting that if you truly understand something, you can explain it simply, without hiding behind jargon, and today we are going to use that exact approach on the science of aging. Because the honest truth is that the difference between a person who declines quickly after 65 and a person who lives another 30 strong years often comes down to a handful of biological decisions made in the first hour of the day, decisions almost nobody is taught, and by the end of this video you will understand exactly what they are and exactly why they work. Before we go further, if this kind of deep, evidence-based explanation is useful to you, take a second and subscribe to Smart Psychology, because we build videos exactly like this one every week, breaking down the real science behind the habits that actually change how you age, and it genuinely helps the channel when you do. Let's start with what actually happens to the human body after 65, because most people think aging is one slow, smooth decline, a straight line heading downward, and that is simply not how the biology works. Aging happens through what researchers call the hallmarks of aging, a set of roughly a dozen interconnected biological processes identified and refined by scientists, including Carlos Lopez Otin and Guido Kromer, published in the journal Cell. These include the shortening of telomeres, the protective caps on the ends of your chromosomes, the gradual decline of mitochondrial function, the energy-producing structures inside every one of your cells, a process called cellular senescence, where old damaged cells stop dividing but refuse to die and instead sit inside your tissues releasing low-grade inflammatory signals, and a general loss of what scientists call proteostasis, the ability of your cells to properly fold, repair, and recycle their own proteins. None of these processes are switches that flip on the day you turn 65. They are gradual, cumulative, and most importantly, they are influenced heavily by daily behavior, which means the rate at which they progress is not fixed the way most people assume. This is where the morning matters so much more than people realize. Richard Feynman had a habit throughout his life of testing every idea against reality rather than accepting it, because someone in authority said so. And if we apply that same skepticism to aging, we find something remarkable. We find that the 24-hour clock inside your body, what scientists call the circadian rhythm, becomes measurably weaker as you age. And a weakened circadian rhythm is directly linked to worse metabolic health, worse immune function, and faster cognitive decline. Research out of Northwestern University, led by Phyllis Z, has shown that older adults with stronger, more consistent circadian rhythms had significantly better physical function and lower rates of depression than those with flattened, disrupted rhythms. And the single most powerful lever for strengthening your circadian rhythm is light exposure in the first 30 to 60 minutes after waking, specifically natural outdoor light, which is many times brighter than any indoor lighting, even on a cloudy day. Here is the mechanism, in plain terms, because understanding it is what makes people actually do it. Your eyes contain specialized cells, separate from the ones responsible for vision, called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, and these cells feed directly into a tiny structure deep in your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, your body's master clock. When bright light hits these cells early in the day, it sets the timing for everything that follows: your cortisol rhythm, your melatonin production later that night, your core body temperature curve, and even the timing of hormone release related to metabolism and appetite. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman has repeatedly emphasized that 10 minutes of outdoor light in the morning, ideally without sunglasses, produces a stronger circadian signal than an hour of bright indoor light, because outdoor light on an overcast day still measures around 1,000 lux, while most indoor lighting sits below 500 lux. For a person over 65, this single habit has outsized value, because studies on light exposure and aging populations, including work published in the journal Sleep, have found that older adults who received consistent morning light exposure had improved sleep quality, better mood stability, and stronger daily rhythms in cortisol, the hormone responsible for giving you energy and alertness in a healthy, regulated way. If you are finding this useful so far, this is a good moment to hit that subscribe button on Smart Psychology, because we are about to get into the parts of this video that most people have never heard explain this clearly, and you will not want to miss the rest of the series. Now let's talk about movement, because this is where Feynman's philosophy of understanding the mechanism before following the rule becomes especially important. Most people over 65 are told to exercise, and they nod, and they do not actually change their morning, because nobody explained why the timing matters so much. Skeletal muscle is not just a tool for movement, it is one of the most metabolically important organs in your entire body. And after age 65, a process called sarcopenia, the age-related loss of muscle mass and strength, accelerates significantly, with research suggesting adults can lose between 3 and 8% of their muscle mass per decade after 30, and that rate roughly doubles after 60. This matters enormously for lifespan, not just quality of life, because grip strength and muscle mass are two of the strongest predictors of all-cause mortality in large population studies, stronger predictors in some research than blood pressure or cholesterol levels. A landmark study published in the British Medical Journal, following nearly 500,000 adults, found that low grip strength was associated with significantly higher risk of death from any cause, including cardiovascular disease and cancer. The good news, and this is the part that should genuinely change how you think about your mornings, is that even light resistance movement performed consistently, 10 to 15 minutes of bodyweight exercises, light resistance band work, or brisk walking with some incline, produces measurable increases in muscle protein synthesis in older adults, according to research from Stuart Phillips at McMaster University, who has spent decades studying exercise and aging. Phillips and his collaborators have shown that older muscle tissue actually becomes more responsive to protein and movement stimulus when that stimulus is applied consistently, a phenomenon sometimes described informally as the muscle full effect being reversible with training. In simple terms, your muscles do not forget how to grow just because you are older. They become slightly less efficient at responding, which means the solution is not giving up on movement. It is being more deliberate and more consistent with it, especially early in the day when cortisol and testosterone are naturally higher, and your body is primed for a stimulus. This connects directly to protein, and this is where most people over 65 are making a mistake without knowing it. Dr. Douglas Padden-Jones at the University of Texas Medical Branch has published extensively on something called the anabolic resistance of aging, which means that older muscle requires a larger dose of protein in a single sitting to trigger the same level of muscle protein synthesis that a younger person would get from a smaller amount. While a younger adult might trigger a strong synthesis response from 20 grams of protein, research suggests older adults may need closer to 35 or even 40 grams in a single meal to produce the same effect. This is precisely why a light breakfast of toast and jam, something extremely common among older adults, does almost nothing for muscle maintenance, while a breakfast built around eggs, Greek yogurt, or a protein-forward option gives the body exactly what it needs during a window when the body is unusually receptive, following the overnight fast. Let's talk about hydration next, because dehydration in older adults is dramatically underappreciated as a health risk, and it is one of those quiet invisible factors that rarely gets discussed in conversations about longevity, even though the underlying research on it is remarkably consistent across studies conducted in different countries and different populations. As we age, the body's thirst signaling mechanism becomes measurably less sensitive, meaning older adults often do not feel thirsty, even when they are meaningfully dehydrated, a finding well documented in research on aging and fluid regulation. Mild dehydration has been linked to reduced cognitive performance, increased fall risk due to dizziness, and additional strain on kidney function, which already naturally declines with age. A glass or two of water first thing in the morning, before coffee, rehydrates a system that has gone 7 or 8 hours without fluid intake, and supports blood pressure regulation at a time of day when blood pressure naturally spikes, a period researchers have associated with the highest risk window for cardiovascular events, including stroke and heart attack, particularly in older populations. This is not a minor wellness suggestion. It is a direct, low-cost intervention against one of the most dangerous windows of the entire day for the aging cardiovascular system. There is another piece of the morning that almost nobody talks about, and it involves a process called autophagy, a term that literally means self-eating, coined by the biologist who later won the Nobel Prize for describing it, Yoshinori Osumi. Autophagy is the process by which your cells identify damaged, misfolded, or worn-out components inside themselves and break them down for recycling, clearing out cellular debris that would otherwise accumulate and contribute to dysfunction. This process is naturally elevated during periods of fasting, including the overnight fast you are already in when you wake up, and research on aging populations suggests that supporting this process, rather than immediately shutting it down with a large, sugar-heavy breakfast, may play a meaningful role in cellular health over time. This does not mean skipping breakfast entirely is required. The protein-forward breakfast we discussed earlier still matters enormously for muscle maintenance. But it does mean that the sugary cereal, the pastry, and the large glass of juice that many older adults still reach for first thing in the morning is working directly against a cellular cleanup process. Your body is trying to run, spiking insulin at precisely the moment your cells would otherwise be focused on repair and recycling. This connects to inflammation, which researchers increasingly describe as one of today's central drivers of age-related disease, so consistently that scientists have coined the term inflammaging to describe the low-grade, chronic inflammation that tends to rise with age, even in the absence of any specific illness. Claudio Franceschi, the researcher credited with popularizing the term, has published extensively on how this background inflammation contributes to cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline, and frailty in older adults. What is remarkable is how directly morning behavior influences this inflammatory baseline. Poor sleep, chronic stress, and diets high in refined sugar all elevate inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein and interleukin-6, while consistent light exposure, movement, adequate protein, and stable blood sugar all appear to lower them over time, based on multiple longitudinal studies tracking inflammatory biomarkers in aging populations. In other words, the same short list of morning habits we have already discussed, light, water, movement, and protein, are not separate strategies working on separate problems. They are converging on the same underlying biological target, the chronic low-grade inflammation that quietly drives so much of what we call aging. Sleep deserves a mention here as well, even though this video is focused on the morning, because the two are deeply connected in a way most people never consider. The same morning light exposure that anchors your circadian rhythm for alertness during the day is also what sets the timer for melatonin release, roughly 14 to 16 hours later that night, according to research from circadian biologists, including Charles Czeisler at Harvard Medical School. Older adults who struggle with fragmented, poor-quality sleep, which is extremely common after 65 due to natural changes in sleep architecture, often trace part of that difficulty back to insufficient bright light exposure during the day, particularly in the morning, when the circadian system is most responsive to light as a timing cue. Poor sleep in turn worsens nearly every hallmark of aging we discussed earlier, from impaired glucose regulation to reduced growth hormone release, to worse clearance of metabolic waste products from the brain during deep sleep stages. Fixing the morning, in a very real sense, is one of the most effective ways to fix the night. Now here is something Feynman himself experienced in a very real, very human way. He was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer in his late 50s, underwent major surgery, and lived with the disease for roughly a decade before it eventually took his life at 69. What is striking, based on accounts from people close to him, is that even during that period, he maintained his curiosity, his engagement with ideas, and a kind of restless mental activity that researchers studying aging now believe may itself be protective. This connects to a growing body of research on cognitive engagement and dementia risk, including long-running studies like the NUN study led by David Snowden, which found that continued mental engagement, learning, and social interaction were associated with better cognitive preservation, even in the presence of physical brain changes, typically associated with Alzheimer's disease. The morning again is a critical window here, because cognitive tasks performed earlier in the day, when cortisol and alertness are naturally elevated, tend to be processed and retained more effectively than the same tasks performed late at night, according to research on chronobiology and learning. One more piece belongs in this conversation, and it is the piece most people would never expect to hear in a video about biology, and that is social connection. Researchers at Brigham Young University, led by Julianne Holt-Lundstad, conducted a large-scale analysis combining data from more than 300,000 participants, and found that weak social connection was associated with an increase in mortality risk comparable to smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day, a number that genuinely surprises most people the first time they hear it. The mechanism runs through the same stress hormone system we discussed earlier with cortisol, because chronic loneliness has been shown to keep cortisol elevated for longer periods, to worsen inflammatory markers, and to disrupt sleep quality, compounding nearly every other factor already working against healthy aging. A short morning phone call to a friend or family member, a walk with a neighbor, or simply stepping outside where brief social interaction is possible, is not a soft, sentimental suggestion. It is a measurable biological input with effects on inflammation and cortisol regulation that rivals some pharmaceutical interventions in the research literature. Feynman himself was known for his constant engagement with other people, trading ideas with colleagues, playing music with friends, and maintaining an active curiosity about the people around him well into his final years. And while that was simply his personality, the research now suggests that this kind of ongoing social and intellectual engagement may have been quietly protective in ways he never set out to measure. Let's bring this together into something concrete, because Feynman's entire teaching philosophy was built around turning abstract understanding into something usable. The morning sequence that the research consistently points toward for adults over 65 looks something like this. Within the first 30 minutes of waking, get outside if you possibly can, even for 5 or 10 minutes, without sunglasses, to anchor your circadian rhythm for the entire day. Drink a glass of water before your first coffee to support hydration and blood pressure regulation during the highest risk window of the day. Move your body in some deliberate way, whether that is a short walk, some light resistance work, or simple mobility exercises, ideally within the first hour, to take advantage of naturally elevated cortisol and to begin reversing the anabolic resistance that comes with age. And eat a protein-forward breakfast, aiming for somewhere between 30 and 40 grams if possible, to give your muscles the raw material they need during a uniquely receptive window following the overnight fast. None of this requires expensive supplements or complicated protocols. It requires roughly 45 minutes of deliberate action at the start of the day, applied consistently, day after day for years. Because that consistency is really the entire point. Population research on longevity, including work coming out of blue zone regions studied by Dan Bittner and public health researchers, consistently shows that the people who live the longest, healthiest lives are not doing anything exotic. They are doing ordinary, unremarkable things with extraordinary consistency, moving naturally throughout the day, eating adequate protein, maintaining strong social connections, and living in rhythm with light and darkness rather than against it. There is no single pill or supplement that replicates the combined effect of these habits, despite what a significant portion of the anti-aging industry would like people to believe. If any part of this has shifted how you think about your own mornings, this is exactly the kind of thing we cover regularly on Smart Psychology. So take a moment now to subscribe and turn on notifications, because we have more videos coming that break down the real biology behind longevity, cognition, and healthy aging, without the hype and without the shortcuts that do not actually work. Let's close with the idea that ties this whole video together. Richard Feynman was famous for saying, in his own words, that he would rather have questions that cannot be answered than answers that cannot be questioned, and there is something in that philosophy that applies directly to how we should think about aging. Most people accept, without ever questioning it, that getting older automatically means getting weaker, getting sicker, and losing 30 potential years of life to preventable decline. But when you actually look at the research, at the hallmarks of aging, at circadian biology, at muscle protein synthesis, at hydration and cardiovascular risk windows, a different picture emerges. One where a meaningful portion of what we call normal aging is actually the accumulated result of thousands of small daily choices, many of them made or missed in that first hour after waking up. You cannot control your genetics, and you cannot control every variable in your health. But you can control what you do in the first 45 minutes after your alarm goes off tomorrow morning. And based on everything the research shows, that window matters more than almost anything else you will do all day. Get outside, drink your water, move your body, feed your muscles, reach out to someone you care about, and do it again tomorrow, and the day after that, Because the extra 30 years are not hiding in some rare secret. They are sitting in the ordinary, repeatable choices available to you starting tomorrow morning. Think about what that actually means over the span of a decade. A single morning of outdoor light, water, movement, and protein will not add years to your life on its own, and nobody studying this research would ever claim otherwise. But 3,650 mornings, the number of mornings in 10 years, each one nudging your circadian rhythm, your muscle protein synthesis, your inflammatory markers, and your cardiovascular system slightly in the right direction, compound to something that just looks from the outside almost like an entirely different trajectory of aging. This is the part of the research that Feynman himself would have appreciated most. Not the dramatic breakthrough, not the miracle supplement, but the quiet compounding power of a mechanism understood clearly enough to be trusted, and applied consistently enough to matter. That is what separates a person who spends their 70s and 80s frail and declining from a person who spends those same decades strong, mobile, and genuinely engaged with life. And the difference, more often than most people are willing to accept, begins in the first 45 minutes after the alarm goes off. So take what you learned today, apply it tomorrow morning, and if you found this valuable, remember that smart psychology will keep bringing you the real science behind aging well, one honest, evidence-based video at a time, and now, unlike most people, you actually understand why.